Thank you.
Okay. I don't usually skip nine halachot, but they were very technical and we're not creating a tchum, and hopefully none of us will be traveling outside of the city without consulting with our rabbi before that on Shabbat and Yantiv. So Halacha Yud and Yud Aleph, I think, are connected because they're talking about situations where it's not because of your actions that something happened, and so the question is how to deal with them under those circumstances. So, if a highway within a city is more than 64 meters wide and bisects the entire city, I don't think he's talking about Ocean Parkway in New York, which we mentioned a few times, but he mentions Netivei Ayalon in Tel Aviv. Then the city is viewed as divided in two, and the Tehum Shabbat for residents of each of the two sections is calculated separately. So they can go from one side of the highway, 2,000 amot outside of the city in their direction, and the other people in the other direction, which is funny because talking about the Ayalon Highway, when you go west, you immediately get to the beach. You can't go, you can't walk more than a thousand amot, 2,000 amot, or approximately 1,500 feet outside of the city limits because you'll be in the Mediterranean. So this is also the case for a wide open area such as a park or a large garden, a Central Park in New York maybe. If it is more than 64 meters wide and bisects the entire city, then the city is viewed as divided in two, and the Tchum Shabbat for each of the two sections is calculated separately. At first glance, it would seem that the Ayalon Highway divides Tel Aviv into two cities. Nevertheless, since there is an Eruv that encompasses all of Tel Aviv and the nearby cities, the Eruv unites the different sections, according to most poskim. Additionally, if a highway bisects a city, but the rectangles drawn around each section overlap, which is part of the halachot that we skip because they describe a lot of architecture and engineering. And then the overlapping area joins together the sections, and we draw a new rectangle around the entire area, as explained above. Additionally, one could argue that since it is intended that all of a city's residents will make use of a highway, park, or large garden, they are considered part of the city and do not actually have to divide it. Others disagree, maintaining that these factors and eruv usage by all city residents and overlapping rectangles cannot join together the two sections formed by a highway or park that bisects a city. The primary position is the lenient one, like we mentioned first. However, it is proper to be stringent and avoid walking more than 12 mil beyond the highway. And so that would be to the east of Tel Aviv, since some say that traveling beyond 12 mil is forbidden by Torah law, as we saw in Halacha yesterday. Um, so this is probably the most practical law about the Tchum. So I'll just bring a short story that I remember from when we were in the army. A lot of times when the army base is not top security, then parents can come and visit occasionally. And since there are no activities on Shabbat, any army activities that aren't emergency on Shabbat, then the soldiers, they have to stay on base for in case of an emergency, but their parents and friends can come visit them as long as they, go through the checkpoint and make sure that everything is secure. And so there was one Shabbat that this family came to visit one of our friends, and they brought cold watermelons with them, and they brought enough for the whole group. And so we didn't know what to do that Shabbat because there was no rabbi around to ask. But we found out that you are allowed to eat food that wasn't prepared on Shabbat, like watermelon. I mean, yes, it was cold, but the cooling of it is not forbidden on Shabbat. Because, for example, on Friday night, if you want to put something in the fridge to keep it cool for the morning, you are allowed to. And so, according to Halacha, maybe the person that they brought it for shouldn't have, but they wouldn't have listened anyway because they were obviously not religious Jews. but everybody else was allowed to have something, but part of it. But if it's something that was cooked on Shabbat, then the person that was cooked for, like we learned way back when in Ilchot Bishul, I think it's the second chapter or third chapter, that were something that was cooked on Shabbat for a Jew is not allowed for that Jew ever, but allowed for all other Jews after Shabbat for the time that it takes to prepare that food, as if we started immediately after Shabbat was over. So sometimes it takes an hour to cook, sometimes an hour and a half, sometimes more, and so that's the law. So that's what we're going to end today's class with. Um, no, sorry, let's just learn one more halacha before that. Um, so, if one is traveling on a plane that's due to unforeseen circumstances lands in an airport on Shabbat, his Tchum Shabbat is established upon his landing, and he may not go farther than 2,000 amot in any direction. Since an airport is generally surrounded by a fence and often contains an area for sleeping, the whole airport is considered his 4 amot, makom shvita, the term that we learned, and he can walk another 2,000 amot beyond it. However, if the airport is not surrounded by a fence, then his makom shvita is established the moment the plane touches down. This sounds like a really, really serious stringency. But then, if the plane then taxis on the runway for another 2,000 amot, he has gone beyond his tuchum, and he may not move any farther than his 4 amot, literally the 6 by 6. So this means he must remain on the plane until Shabbat ends. But of course, Rabbi Melamed knows that that's not a formidable possibility, and therefore, if the crew or security personnel insist that they leave or that he needs to leave in order to use the bathroom, he may do so. If he then reaches an enclosed area, he may move around within it, since the only reason he originally traveled beyond his tchum is that he was forced to do so. It was ones, and if his flight was for the sake of a mitzvah, then even if the plane taxied for a full kilometer and the airport is not fenced in, he may still walk 2,000 amot from the airport door. So that brings us to a different discussion about what is a mitzvah. Obviously, to save people's lives is a mitzvah, but there's so many different opinions today, and unfortunately, a large group of Jewish people believe that going to shul for a minyan is a mitzvah. I disagree. I'm not a posek, but the only mitzvah that I think we keep by praying in a minyan is ve'avta kamocha, and being able to say things together, b'kedusha, but I think that it does not allow chilul Shabbat. So one whose boat docked on Shabbat may leave the boat and walk 2,000 amot in each direction. Why is this different from a plane? This is because until reaching the port, the boat was more than 10 tfachim above the ocean floor, so Tchum Shabbat did not apply to it. Only once he sets foot on dry land is his Tchum established. If the port is fenced in, he may walk 2,000 amot beyond the enclosure. So I believe that in Saloniki, the capital of, no, maybe it's not the capital, Saloniki in Greece, the port is very, very large because it's deep waters. And it is all fenced in from the outside. The sea, obviously, there's no fence, but the Jewish community is very close because that's where the flood zone was, and so the original Jewish community was very close to the port, and so that would be very appropriate there. One who traveled beyond his tchum and then returned inside his tchum unknowingly or due to circumstances beyond his control may still walk within his tchum. However, if he traveled beyond the tchum knowingly, b'mezid, then even if he returned unknowingly, he forfeits his tchum, though he may still walk throughout the city. And so just as one may not travel beyond his tchum on Shabbat, he also may not move his possessions outside the tchum. If he took fruit beyond the tchum unknowingly, even though they may not be carried more than 4 amot, they may be eaten at that spot where he is. If he didn't so knowingly, the fruit may not be eaten. And so now, finally, with the story that I started with, if a non-Jew or a non-observant Jew brought fruit from outside the tchum on Shabbat, as long as he brought them for himself or for another non-Jew, a Jew may eat the fruit. However, one may not carry them more than 4 amot. If the non-Jew brought the fruit into a home or a site that is enclosed by a fence or a roof, one may carry the fruit within the enclosed area, so that would apply very much to the army base because it's definitely enclosed. In contrast, if the non-Jew brought the fruit for a Jew, that Jew and the members of his household may not eat the fruit until enough time has passed after Shabbat for the fruit to have been brought then, and that's based on what we said before about what's called bichdei shiyuchan. So, bichdei shiyasu, that it takes the time after Shabbat for it to be made. And we'll stop here and open up for questions.